I want to know, do Christians have to be conservatives? Something bugging you? Come on in. Let's go for a drive. Dr. Jeff, thanks for joining me again for another episode of What's Bugging You. For us, It's the same day. For our viewers, it's a different day.
Well, that's why we always wear these exact same clothes. That's
no matter what. We are doing a little off-roading here in Pagosa Springs, Colorado.
Who knew that Roscoe could do an off-road? I know you're all going to see some of the sights around here, but this is a fall day. It's absolutely stunning out here.
Yeah, the aspen trees are turning. They're kind of at their prime right now. It's great. So another question that I had to ask you is, well, I'll just launch into it. I want to know, do Christians have to be conservatives? And this is something that tends to come up. Our students take a politics class, and they're surprised when I don't bring in necessarily someone who. Can I say that? Sure, I can. Yeah. I don't bring in someone who is, having the Trump flags in the back of their pickup truck and saying, okay, we're Christians, so we're going to vote in this particular way. It's a little more nuanced than that. Yeah. But at the same time, there's something about conservative and Christian that seem to go together in some ways, but it's certainly not the same thing. Maybe you can help us think through this a little more clearly.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, there are a couple of things I would point out. First of all, we got to understand what the basis of the American system was designed to be. Our founders decided that they would begin with principles and then move toward rational policies based on those principles, and then deal with the personality differences and how they would see things in a contrary fashion, because we're people. So they start with the principles. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Then they move to the policies. The best kind of government, based on what we know about human nature, is going to divide the powers. Mm-hmm. So that there's never a point where any one person can get all of the power. Okay, and then we have different personalities. They're going to be knockdown dragouts. You're going to have the debates between Adams and Jefferson, and between Hamilton and Burr, and so forth. The founding fathers don't always just get along, in a happy, slappy sort of way. They are at odds with one another, but they can make rational decisions about the future of the nation because they've agreed to certain policies that are based on certain principles. That tells us something about the nature of politics that most people overlook, because most people start with personalities. Mm-hmm. I like Donald Trump, so therefore I'm going to embrace his policies. Or I don't like Donald Trump, therefore whatever he says, I'm against.
Right.
Either way, you're letting the tail wag the dog. You're starting with personalities and then seeing if you can figure out rational policies, and you never arrive at principles that are worth holding no matter what, for life or death. So we flip the process and we mess it all up and make it impossible to have good conversations where people don't get triggered. Okay, so I'm going to start with the principles, the policies, then deal with the personalities. So here's the way I look at it. The word conservative. What do we mean? I'm always asking, what do you mean by that?
Good.
What a lot of people mean by conservative is conservationist. They mean there's only so much to go around, only the material world exists, there's no God, there's no Jesus, there's no Holy Spirit, there's no heaven, there's no hell. Only the material world is here. If you get any more of it, that means I have less of it. So my whole goal is to make sure that you don't get anything more.
Okay.
Because then that would be taking away from me, right?
So I want to conserve what I have.
I'm going to conserve what I have. There's another way to look at it, what is it that you are trying to conserve? Is it your material holdings or is it your ideas? Well, do we live in a world in which only the material world exists? Or do we live in a world in which our ideas and our impressions and our inspirations and our information are actually real? Okay? If we can't answer that question, there's no point talking any further.
Well, that's true. It seems pretty obvious that there is more to this world. There's more to reality.
If there is more
to
it, then what are you trying to conserve? You're trying to conserve the core principles. So I am a conservative by that definition. I am not interested in preserving what I have materially. I am not interested in turning back the clock to the 1950s when I've heard that everything was better because we had big cool cars and drive-ins. And, people didn't have sex and they never cussed and they never drank. Or
those were the days, right?
That's right.
Some people say conservatives don't like change. Well, the only change they like is back to the way it was.
That's right. Yeah. That is a materialistic view. I know a lot of people believe that. They do say, well, the 1950s were better. At least they were for me. I know a lot of people for whom the 1950s were absolutely not better, those who were alive at that time. I am not a conservative because I want to turn back the clock. I'm a conservative because I want to preserve the core principles that lead to blessing and flourishing. So, for example, that every human being bears God's image. If you just begin with that, you end up with all kinds of different policies, and you're able to deal with the personalities. The person you don't like is a person who is made in the image of God, who has a soul that will live forever, and and that person matters to God very much. Okay, whether you like them or not. So you don't interact with them based on whether you like them or not. You're asking God, what do you see when you look at this person? What do you hear when you hear them? What do you want me to see? What do you want me to hear? How do you want me to discern? If we start with the idea of image bearing, we recognize that when a human being is born with a mind made in God's image, all kinds of cool things can happen in their lives that will make life better for everybody else. So I was giving the example to the students at the Summit Gap here this morning about semiconductors. The whole world has become wealthier because of computers. Computers are made of microchips. Microchips are made of silicon, aluminum, and oxygen, literally the three most common elements in the Earth's crust.
Yeah.
They are as cheap as dirt because they literally are dirt. Dirt plus human intelligence has changed the world and brought a level of prosperity to more people who would never have seen it in previous centuries than we could ever have imagined. It was minds plus dirt that made that change. That's a principle worth conserving. If you say, no, we don't want more people. No, we're not going to let people think. No, we're not going to let them be free to come up with ideas. Then that's the kind of conservatism I'm not going to embrace.
Right.
I am not interested in turning back the clock so that the people who have power can keep it. I am interested in a world in which there's actual abundance because we're all free to think, grow, come up with ideas that can bring blessing and flourishing to other people.
So conservative in this way is about ideas, but it's not about just any old ideas to conserve. It's about the proper ideas that are good to preserve for the flourishing of
right. It's
people
about ideas.
Or
it's
nation.
It's also a trip about information, and I know this is short term. We got to kind of unpack this, but I want you to think of a railroad system. So you have a railroad car. It's very, very simple. Every railroad car is built exactly the same way, the same width, the same kind of shocks, the same couplers, all those things. If every railroad car was different, it would be very difficult to operate a railroad. You basically build them all to be exactly the same. You take as much information out of them as possible. A low information carrier, then they can carry an infinite number of valuable goods. Okay? In a way, like our Constitution is a low information carrier. It doesn't specify what every single law should be about every single thing. It outlines certain core principles about how things are going to operate. That's an example of a core principle that is worth preserving. You have a low information carrier that allows you to create value. And we think about that in terms of our, let's say, government regulations. If government regulations are excessive, then it can create order. It can create, however, so much order that nobody innovates anymore because they can't, or there's no way for them to benefit from the innovation. I would say low information carrier is better. And I think that's a fundamental conservative principle. I don't want a world with no regulations. I'm not an anarchist.
Right.
But I want I want the government not to be trying to create order. I want the government to be sort of like a traffic cop, to allow the free flow of information so that people can create value.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So being conservative is not really the opposite of being progressive. It depends on what you mean, of course, by progressive, but the way that you're talking about being conservative actually conserves the ideas that allow good progress.
Good progress, yeah.
to really,
I mean, progressive. A lot of people, everybody uses that term, and some people use it as a curse word.
Yeah.
When I think of what progressives are, I look back at like the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Okay, they outline all of their beliefs. All of their beliefs are things that have been proven by history to retard progress, not bring it. Now, and I mean economic progress, I mean freedom, I mean the ability of people to move and innovate and come up with new ideas and take their inspirations and use them to benefit themselves and their families. So, yeah, we want good progress.
Yeah.
But we want good progress based on those core principles, not based on the ability of a government to gain power, confiscate wealth, redistribute it according to the dictates of whoever happens to have the authority at this moment.
Right.
So,
okay.
That's where you see my conservatism starting to come out. But again, I'm all about conserving those core principles. Not interested in turning back the clock. I love museums. I don't want to live in one.
That's a night at the museum. Maybe that'd be fun. Can you recommend some resources to just get us thinking along these lines a bit more?
Yeah, you know what? This is weird, but we got to study economics a little bit. I know people think that's really boring, but there's a book I would recommend that is fairly easy to read except for 2 chapters, one on banking and one on Bitcoin or blockchains. Skip those. The book is called Life After Capitalism by George Gilder. And he will explain how the phrase in Scripture, "in the beginning was the Word," is the basis of all true prosperity. And especially if you're discouraged about the way things are going in the world, you might find this to be very encouraging. It avoids all the libertarian tropes, it avoids all the progressive tropes, but it goes straight to what does it actually mean that we human beings have minds and how do we steward them well.
Yeah, good. I certainly enjoyed the book. Dr. Jeff made me read the book, basically.
it was a job requirement.
It was, and it was a good one. So I appreciate it. Well, thanks for joining me in Roscoe again today for What's Bugging You. Appreciate it.
You bet.